everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Lana and I am the host for today. Today I am joined by my co-hosts. We have Erica here and Chase. So before we get started, I do have a quick announcement. We do have a new exhibit opening on February 6th at Raffma. It's called Personal to Political, and it is in celebration of Black History Month. So be sure to check that out once it comes. Miranda will be dropping a link in the chat, so there it is if you guys want to see it once it's out. Okay, so just get started. I'm going to do some quick intros. So my name is Lana. I'm your host for today. I'm a fourth year currently at CSUSB. I am a double major in kinesiology and art. And I guess a quick fun fact about myself is that I like to play piano. We also have Chase here. He is also a fourth year. He is also double majoring, but he's double majoring in art history and studio art. And for studio art, his focus is in ceramics and pottery. And he also is an avid punk fan and enjoys going to punk concerts when it's not a pandemic. And we also have Erica. She's a junior. She's a history major with a minor in anthropology, and her focus is in ancient Egypt. And she loves to collect plants and has a green thumb. So hi guys, thanks for being here. So today we are going to talk about what it's like working in a museum. So all of us have been working for some time at Raffma. We do have kind of different experiences because we started at different times. But why don't we start off with Erica? What made you interested in, signing up for a job at Raffma?
I think it was really, I've just always loved going to museums when I was a little kid. Like everyone in my family, they weren't that into it. But every time I got to choose something we wanted, like we did it as family, I was always the one that wanted to go to the Natural History Museum or the Science Center. So when I got into college and I wasn't 100% in love with my major, I did some research and I found out that, oh, I can like major in public and oral history, which is like museum studies in a sense. So that's when I switched to that. And then when I found out that we had two museums on campus, I was like over the moon excited. And I knew that I wanted to like be a part of that because that was something I wanted to do later in life. And that's what I wanted to do like professionally. So I started as a docent because there weren't any volunteer opportunities. But then once an opportunity arose, I was like, I need to do this. So yeah, long story short, I just like museums.
Awesome. And then how about you, Chase? Would you say it's something similar where it was like ingrained in you from youth, or is it just something you kind of stumbled upon?
Yeah, kind of the opposite from Erica. When I started studying more and more art and art history, I kind of didn't have that experience going to a lot of museums and institutions like that when I was younger. So when I started studying more and more art history, I kind of realized, well, maybe I need to get some serious experience with what a museum is and how it works. And where better to go towards that than from the inside?
Right. Yeah. I think I kind of had the same approach because Erica kind of mentioned that, she didn't start college thinking like, okay, I'm gonna like go for museum, we're taking like a different route. I definitely had that same experience being a kinesiology major for like 3 years. But I decided like I love the arts, I want to get involved in that somehow. And so that's when I talked to Ever, our director, and I'm like, I want to get involved somehow. And that's where I found my job. Like I didn't come in, thinking like, oh, I want to get a job. Um, so it's kind of interesting how we all have like different paths of how to get here. I kind of mentioned that we all started in different ways. You and Chase and I, we started at like the same time. I think like in that same week we were both hired, and that was right before the pandemic started. So I think we have sort of like similar experiences. Like getting introduced to the job. Learning how to like to lock up and everything, and how to deal with people coming in. But Erica, you started kind of like right in the middle of the pandemic. So what was it like for you starting, while everything was on lockdown?
um, It was definitely a lot different because I did start as a docent, which is nothing like the job really, because for docentry, we're just giving people tours and that kind of stuff. Um, so it was really interesting to learn like that aspect of it. But then going in during the pandemic when it's all super shut down and locked down, um, it was really not scary in a way, but it felt like I had to be like super cautious, which of course we had to. Um, was just a lot different because I feel like if I had started working at the museum when there were still a lot of people in there, we definitely wouldn't be doing the things that we are with the collections, because we're literally like taking pictures of them, and we're using the space that's not being used because there's no one there. So it's really different than what I expected it to be, just because when I imagine myself working at a museum, it would be when there are people there. But now that there's not people there, we kind of have to adapt and make sure that people can still experience the museum, which I guess is really cool because we're taking the museum to people, which had never really crossed my mind. Like that could be something we could do. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and then Chase, you kind of have that mix of like you started working, when everything was normal and open, and then since then you've gone back to working in person, whereas I haven't been in the museum, since lockdown started because my job, allows me to work from home, so that's what I've been doing. So what was that like? I know Erica, you said like you didn't really get that experience of, working in person, but Chase, how was that like going from, working in person to pandemic and then like still being able to adapt to, working?
It was really interesting, especially at the time, because literally I start working at this brand new job. I start getting trained to work the front desk and the front door and the whole front end to the museum, learning how to greet people in person, learning how to make sure they can get around the museum. And then pretty much the next day, like the next week from when I just started learning this, it was, yeah, we're locking the doors and you're not coming back. It's gonna be a while before you're doing this again. Um, and so going from that to working similarly to you in that I was entirely online and remote, I was doing tasks that kind of build up over a museum's backlog over time. Things like transcribing interviews, building online galleries with old images. Um, and it was definitely a very different face from having to show up to the museum every day, kind of a traditional being on the place job, to suddenly I have to manage my own clocking in and clocking out, and I have to make sure that I'm on task. Very, very different.
Right.
And
Um,
nowadays, I'm kind of in between the two. I'm both doing work at home, and every week, or even more often than once a week, I'm coming into the museum and working with uh, a little difficult because of all the social distancing and precautions we have to take, but working with the other people at the museum to build our galleries.
mhm. Right. So I think we all kind of mentioned how, going online wasn't really what we expected when working in a museum. Um, so just kind of bouncing off of that, I think that we all have these like notions, of what it's going to be like working in a museum before we go in. But what's something that we didn't see happening? So I kind of want to start because when I first got my job, I remember telling all my friends, all my family, like, you guys, there's so many doors in a museum. Um, so I remember that was my experience when I first started. I was like remembering which doors. I remember Chase, there was once that I think you were locked out of the front and I had to come let you in. But then when I went to let you in, I got locked out too. And so it's like find this roundabout way of getting in. Um, so I remember I was thinking like, there's so many doors, I'm never gonna remember it, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to get a refresher for when we go back on campus. So that was my experience. What was something that you guys kind of experienced that you didn't think you would? So Chase, you can go ahead and start with this.
Um, I guess kind of like your doors is the lights. We have a very large panel with so many different switches, and every switch is a different kind of switch, and they're all labeled differently, and some of them aren't labeled at all. And learning that was definitely an experience that I'm about 8 months rusty on, and will have to completely relearn again.
And how about you, Erica? I know that like for you it's gonna be a little different because you didn't have to deal, like learning how to lock up and all that kind of stuff. But what's something that was definitely unexpected, going into the museum?
I think it was definitely like how many objects we have in the museum, because coming in from my very limited experience, I just thought that we only had stuff that was on display, and we didn't like I knew that we had objects, but I didn't know where we kept them or anything. But just knowing that we have just these vaults full of objects just sitting in the back that we can take out and like rotate for other things, it's just kind of crazy to think how many objects are actually just in the museum that aren't even being like looked at all the time. So that was really interesting to know.
Yeah, I remember when I was first hired and I was getting like a grand tour of the place, and like there was this secret door that opened up to, the workshop. And I remember our supervisor, he was like, okay, we have this storage room. And I'm like, whoa, this is huge. And then we're like, if we turn to this corner, there's this storage room. And there's like so many different, rooms and like I said, like doors and like all sorts of different like nooks and crannies in the place that you don't even see when you walk in. Um, so I guess bouncing off of that, for me, like it was difficult to, learn which door goes where, what light switch controls, what light. Um, so what else do you think is a difficult part in working in a museum?
As far as what I have going on right now, it's definitely very unexpected from where I originally was being trained to work the front desk. I'm doing a lot of stuff with our virtual galleries and exhibits, which means I've had to learn some pretty heavy technical software and stuff, things like 3D modeling in Blender or using special software to build these 3D tours. Um, it's definitely not what I originally signed on for, but it's an interesting turn that I'm learning so much about that, along with learning about the museum and how these things work together.
Right.
Yeah. Similar to Chase, I think the thing that I wasn't expecting was how much stuff I'd have to learn, which I know sounds crazy, but like when I first imagined myself working in a museum, I didn't imagine myself having to learn Blender like Jace has to, or how to. I don't know how to work computers or cameras, but that's part of my main job description now is like taking pictures of the objects. So learning about what an iOS is, or learning about what the focus or the shutter speed, or like how to do that or change that on a camera. It was just a lot to learn, and it took a really long time, but I think I'm better off for it now. Definitely know how to use a camera now. So
Uh, yeah,
I'm with you on the cameras too. I've been stalling taking my digital photography class that I'm supposed to take for years and years and years now, and suddenly I'm like, oh, uh, this manual is about this thick. Maybe I should have taken that class.
right. That's funny. And I think, one of the great things about working in a museum is that you learn a bunch of different things that like skills that you wouldn't have learned otherwise. Um, I know this seems like a really like strange skill to learn, but when I first started, I was working a lot with collections, and over time, my position sort of changed, with the situation. But I remember I had like 700 photos of, like different corners of paintings, um, I think it was the Jan Safka exhibit. And I think Chase, you worked on that one too a little bit. Um, I had a bunch of these photos and I had to look at, okay, like which corner goes to which painting. And it was a lot of being able to piece things together, and look at the details to form that overall picture. So I don't know if you could consider that like a skill that you learn, but it was definitely like something I didn't see myself doing. But I think, you learn something valuable from it. And, and Chasey kind of, well, and Erica, you both kind of mentioned, learning how to take photos and things like that. Um, Also being on a podcast, definitely something I didn't see myself doing, but I think, you definitely learn, new skills, um, and you kind of, grow from that. Um, so what do you guys think would be your favorite part overall? Like, just say one thing. What's your favorite part about working in the museum?
Definitely the opportunity to work so close, hands-on with artifacts and objects for our collection. That I'm a ceramic artist on my own. I do ceramic arts, and those kind of pieces are meant to be displayed, in the round with every single bit of them accessible. The first thing I do when I see somebody's brand new bowl or mug is I grab it and then I flip it upside down and look at the bottom. And I'll flip it back side up and look really deep into the hole or whatever. And that's not an experience you normally get walking around through a museum looking at things through a pane of glass. Um, and so being able to lift these objects to turn them all around and then put them into our little photo studio that we're taking these photos with, is definitely a very, very cool experience.
yeah, I'm in the exact same boat as Chase, especially since like at Raffma we have such a large collection of ancient Egyptian, but then also just ancient objects in general. And me being wanting to specialize in ancient Egypt, just having the ability to work so closely with them and actually handle the objects. Like I remember I think one of the first objects I held was a mummified cat head. And I never thought, I was so amazed by like just how pristine it was. Like you could still, I mean, it's kind of gross, but I still could like smell it almost. And just like being able to like not hold it, but like transport it to the light box that we use, and just taking pictures of it and being able to see that from every single corner, like every single angle of it. It was just so like amazing and like really solidified that this is what I want to do. I want to work with objects. And especially thinking like after COVID, I was like, oh, I'm never going to get to go to Egypt. I'm never going to be able to work with objects, just that pessimistic like mindset. Like working at Raffma has really like opened, like made me optimistic again and given me the opportunity to do what I like. So
Mhm. So when you guys handle these objects, because I mean, I went online before I got the opportunity to do that. So I'm kind of curious, when you guys are handling these objects, do you guys feel like these objects are thousands of years old, or do you guys kind of forget the age and it just kind of becomes another object?
I know every time my supervisor tells me, like I'm always wearing gloves and everything, but every time he's telling me to do something, I'm just terrified of like holding it too hard and like not like crushing it, but then also like not holding it hard enough so it like drops. That's one of my, I mean, that's everyone's biggest fear, but it's crazy to think how old these objects are. But then also like I was terrified of dropping this object, but you pick it up and it's like it's pretty hefty, like you're not going to drop it. So it's just crazy to think that these are so old and we think of them as being so fragile, but they're still pretty like hefty, and like they're not going to break just at the slightest touch of them, which was a like really weird for me to understand and grasp.
Right. And like when you think about it, these objects are thousands of years old and they've survived, the test of time. They survived, years and years of people, touching them and going from hand to hand. So, I mean, like, there's definitely a lot of caution when it takes to handling these objects, but at the same time, you think like me, like touching this one spot isn't going to necessarily make the whole thing disintegrate. I mean, it's lasted this long. But Chase, what's your experience when you hold these objects?
Um,
Does it feel
I
like the
just
object?
I
Or...
just kind of think about how interesting it is, how you, as you said, these things, they're not like a painting from 20 years ago where the painter painted it and then it was put into a gallery and perfectly taken care of for the rest of its short life. These are objects that were buried in a hole for who knows how long, probably ripped up out of that hole, tossed from hand to hand to hand to hand, taken from collector to collector, across from collection to collection. So a lot of these objects, they might even have had all sorts of accidents happen to them. They might be damaged, and that kind of just becomes a part of the piece from then on.
Mhm.
Um, and so I definitely think a lot about how I don't think I want to leave my mark on history quite that way.
Right. You know, you guys keep talking about like, these objects aren't going to break. I just remembered a while ago we did a podcast episode where we had John Fleeman, one of the staff at Raffma, where we talked about, the notorious mask. The mask that was on the wall. No, it was on the wall. It was on the shelf, I think. And like it magically like slid off and broke. And then, this is where we get the concept of, the haunted museum. Do you guys have any experience with hauntings at the museum, or what do you guys think?
There's been a couple times where I've been in the museum, like not alone, but definitely my supervisor was like taking a lunch break or something, and I was still working, and I could hear, at least I thought I could hear, like I thought I could hear people like walking, and like I just heard noises, and I was like, this doesn't sound like just normal house or like buildings creaking. So I'm a firm believer that Raffma is haunted, but not in like a scary way. I think they're just there.
Just kind of like you're sharing the space.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I mean, it would, at least in my opinion, it like makes sense that all these objects are thousands of years old. There might be something like attached to it almost. So it makes sense in my opinion.
Mhm. And what about your experience, Chase? Do you have any,
uh,
otherworldly experiences?
I will say that when our last exhibition was up, when we had one particular artwork was a whole bunch of fans on the ceiling that were kind of set up to automatically actuate. They had motion sensors that would pretty much, the piece itself would decide when it wanted to start up and making noise or stop making noise. So it was definitely interesting to just be alone in the museum doing your thing, and then suddenly you hear whirring from across the museum just because the artworks decided to act up again.
And I remember when I first started we had Teresa. She doesn't work for Raffma now, but she did the podcast with me last season. She told me all sorts of stories where she was like, "I'm sitting here alone, 6 o'clock at night, and I hear footsteps." Luckily, I haven't had any experiences, but yeah, definitely something interesting about our particular workplace. Um, do you guys have a least favorite part about the job? And I can kind of start with this. Something that I didn't think about going in is, museums are pretty quiet. And I'm someone who I love to listen to music, all that kind of stuff. When you're sitting at the front desk, waiting for people to come in, you kind of have to be respectful of that. So I do think that sometimes it can get quiet, especially on slow days. You're just kind of sitting there like, okay, now what? So that's definitely something you have to get used to. Just like the stillness, I guess, that happens like when it's business hours and there's a lot of people. So what's your guys' experience?
Okay,
Um, I don't think there are
so
any like, oh,
you can go, Chase.
with my non-answer, I don't think there are any like big parts that I think of as something I dislike like that. Especially with how we have things set up right now. Where I'm a lot of the time working at home, just on my kind of long-term project that I've been working at for a while. Um, I can usually tweak things so I don't have to worry about too much.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm kind of in the same boat as Chase, is that I have a non-answer, and it's literally just kind of like waking up and driving to the museum, because I always like, it's not that like work super early or anything. It's just like the process of, I've been stuck at home for 8 months and now I like being at home. But then as soon as I get to the museum, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the best day of the week. I'm not around my family. I'm around new people. I have new people to talk to. It's crazy. But then if you want like a real answer, I guess it would be like when something you've been working on for the past couple of weeks or past couple of days and it doesn't work out. So then you have to start all over. Like that's happened a couple of times with some of the photographs where they just like the F or the white balance isn't correct or the iOS is wrong and none of the pictures you took out or like came out, and you like spent 30 minutes taking all these photos and I have to redo them. So yeah, just I guess when things don't go to plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even beyond the ones where it's like simplest mistakes we make, sometimes the software just comes together and says, no, there are a couple pieces that the algorithm of the software we use just for whatever reason really doesn't like them. If you want the real ghost in the museum, that's the algorithm that rules us all.
That's funny. Um, so, working in a museum, we have the unique experience where we see a lot of what goes on behind the scenes. Like we've all, worked in the back room, you guys are working with the photography and, getting things in like the virtual setting and taking these 3D scans of it. Um, if there's one thing that you have to say that you wish people knew about working in a museum that they're not aware of, what do you guys think that would be? So Erica, you can go ahead and start with this.
That's hard.
Yeah.
I think maybe like how much time goes into curating these exhibits. Um, just from like my personal experience, I've seen like how much time it goes, especially when we're trying to virtualize it so everyone can enjoy it. I don't think people realize, especially me going in, I didn't realize how much time would be needed to take the photos, and then you have to color correct them, and then you also have to put them into the software. But the software can take, depending on what computer you're using, it can take up to like, I've seen like 4 hours or something. But then even then, like Chase said, it doesn't work out, so then you have to start over and figure it out. So I think people just don't realize how long it takes for the finished product to be as good as it is. Um, but yeah.
I was kind of thinking about the physical version of that, I guess, where everything that it takes to set up what you see as a gallery, through the curation, the deciding what goes into it, how things should look, to the actual building. Like, what does it take to, when your object is some goofy little statue thing that has its base broken off, only has half of its legs, doesn't really have a head or anything anymore, is barely recognizable as a little sculpture. But how do you display that? How are you going to like make a little rig of ringed wires that'll hold it up? or are you going to make a little platform for it and just rest it on that, or how are you going to do that to keep it safe and to display it best at the same time?
Right.
um, there's a lot of time and thought and a lot of work from a lot of different people into making everything come together, where you might see it on first glance as just a little object sitting on a table in a room.
Right. I think one thing that that I didn't realize, but now it makes sense, is how much documentation there is of everything. Like, I remember when I was working on the Golden West exhibit. I remember we had to go around, like with a camera or like a phone, and we had to take a picture of every single little piece of debris, every single little scratch that might be on a painting, every single little corner, every nail. Um, and so it was a lot of like documentation, and like in retrospection, like, yeah, that makes sense. We have to document everything because that's how it came into the museum. We want to make sure that things, especially like the things that are on temporary loan, we want to make sure that we are passing it on to the owner the way we got it. um, there was a lot of documentation, and I think that kind of ties into what you're saying, Chase. It's a lot of working with the pieces, and there's also a lot of problem solving too that you kind of brought up, where figuring out the best way to display things, make sure they sit right. Also, like working with the lighting, make sure the lighting is working, for the piece, because we want each piece to kind of be displayed in the best way that they possibly can. Talking about that, do you guys have I mean, it's going to be hard to do, with the travel and exhibits, but at least for the Egyptian one, is there a certain piece that you think really speaks to you, or is there like one piece that you think you have an attachment to? They're like, oh, this is my favorite piece.
We haven't gotten to them or worked with them much yet, but I really like our set of canopic jars, these kind of big clay jars that the ancient Egyptians would store embalmed organs in after they removed them from the mummy's body. We haven't gotten a chance to work with them closely yet, and I've just had my eye on them this whole time for months and months going, we'll get to you eventually.
I think for me, there's two objects that really stand out to me. And the first one is the mummy, the cat mummy head that I did, because it was my first object that I got to like hold and transport. It was the first object I got to like see to the finish and actually see a 3D object of. But then also I have cats at home. So just, I just feel like personal connection to it. I just really like that one. But then on top of that, there's the statue of the little girl in the front. Her name is Heta Paris. And I just, I'm really intrigued by her, and I've done some research on her, and I just wish that there was a way to know more about her and about her family. And like there's archives that we can go to, but since she's a little girl, she's important but not super important as like her father or her mother and that kind of stuff. So yeah, those two, I really like those two.
Okay. I think for me, we have these little dolls. I think they're called the Shakti dolls. Um, I remember when I was getting like my first tour of the place, those are really what stood out to me because, um, as an artist, my area of interest is doing miniatures and making tiny recreations of things, and that's exactly what those dolls are. Granted, they have a different purpose. They're meant for nobles to take to the afterlife with them. But those definitely stood out to me because one, we have so many of them. I remember seeing like whole display of just like 5, 10 of them. Um, Also, there's these, I think it's a blue glaze, I believe. Chase, you might know more about this, coming from that pottery background. But, this blue that we always associate with Egypt, was this glaze that they have. I think it's called faience.
Yeah, the faience.
Yeah. Um, so when I saw like a shopti that was made of faience, I was like, whoa, this thing is amazing. It's beautiful. So yeah, that one really spoke out to me. Um,
And then jumping off that, I also really like that big old box of Shopties that are just full of the fan Shopties. I thought those were like really interesting to see how, I mean, they're not all similar, but just once I actually like started looking at them and like learning how they were made and that kind of stuff, it was really interesting. So yeah, sorry, thought you
I
said
think
that.
I don't think I've seen that one in person, but I do remember seeing a picture of it online where it's like a tiny coffin that's
Mm-hmm.
filled with even more tiny like of these dolls.
Mm-hmm.
It's just great. Like it's funny because like they would treat these dolls like they would like bury them like as they would mummies. So it's just crazy. Like you're making like tiny coffins for these tiny dolls. Um, Super interesting. So what's something that you guys think you do in your museum job that's only applicable to a museum job that you think you wouldn't be doing somewhere else? Like what's one unique thing that's unique to working in a museum that you don't
Part of
get?
it is definitely kind of the specific and very careful ways we deal with the artifacts. A lot of other places and industries, you will be handling small, very expensive and important things. Um, but like if you're manufacturing high-end electronics or something and you do drop something and ding it, then you fix it or you throw it away and make a new one and just take the loss. But very rarely are you going to go, well, that's just how this is now, and then that's part of the thing, and you can't get rid of it or lose it because it is a priceless 3,000-year-old little Shabti statue. Um, so kind of the how we have to care for things and that us caring for it becomes a part of this piece's history. Where if you're manufacturing something, you don't want anything to be part of its history. You kind of want it to be in your hands, brand new. This has no history. It's just new. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I was thinking like something similar, but like we have to be really cautious with what we're holding. But then also on top of that, we don't necessarily know everything about the object we're taking photos of or like we're handling. So I feel like in modern day jobs, you can usually look up like what you're producing or what you're going to like what the meaning behind the book you're writing or something like that. But with these objects, there's just like, well, the ancient Egyptians didn't really write anything, so we can infer, but we don't actually know for sure what's happening with it. So it's like we don't even know if we have the right name, we don't know if we have the right date for it, we don't know if anything we have about these objects is right, but we just kind of have to go with it.
And that is something really cool and different is that, yeah, if you're making a high-end camera or something, you know exactly every single part of it and the purpose of every single little nook and cranny of it. Whereas when you have, say, a little stone block thing carved in to look like different things, we don't know pretty much anything about it beyond what you can easily tell at a glance. Which means the one day when you're carrying it across the room and look at it in a slightly different way, you realize, oh, there's a whole face there that I've never seen before. You can learn from these objects things that nobody has ever learned in the last few thousand years. Um, that were just kind of hiding there all along.
Right. Um, so we're kind of wrapping up towards the end. So I guess I have one last question before we switch to Q&A. So we talked about, our unique experiences, things we didn't know, we did know, things like that. We talked about, unique experiences that we get in the museum. So kind of wrapping up, I know one question I always get when people ask like, oh, where do you work? I say, oh, museum. You kind of get the like museum, why? Like what are you gonna do with that? So I guess my question is, we're all student assistants. We know that we have more to do in our academic and our career journeys. So what for you guys is the end goal? Like for me, my end goal is art conservation. So, that kind of brought me to the museum because, we have this mix of both art and things that need to be conserved, these old objects. So that's what really, that was appealing to me, for the museum. So what is, in your case, we can start with you, Chase, what's the end goal?
This is a really hard one. um, just kind of a large reason why I'm at a museum in the first place is for me. It's kind of selfish. I want to be able to work with pieces. I want to be able to learn from them. I want to be able to take the lessons I see from these ancient works and maybe take it into my own art even. So whatever lets me stay hands-on with things like these, or for more contemporary art, whatever lets me interact with these artists and work with them, whether it be curation or conservation in a museum or doing more academic work. Whatever works for me, just as long as I get to kind of have the experience.
Right.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of similar to Chase, but I want to have the experience of working with the objects because my ultimate goal is to be like an Egyptologist and be the one finding these objects, like out in Egypt. That's what I want to do. I want to like have an archaeological site. So just having the ability to handle these objects and learn more about them and see them more personal, and just hopefully being able to take that information on into my grad school life and into my like future career life. It's really helpful and beneficial, and I'm really appreciative of it.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you guys. That's pretty much all we have. So we're going to go ahead and start with Q&A. Hold on. So if you guys have any questions in the audience, please feel free to drop it into the chat. So let's start with the first pre-submitted question. This one we kind of talked about beforehand, but I guess we can kind of expand on it more. Does it ever get boring working in a museum?
Well, certainly when when we're just waiting for our programs to just render something or just load something, we just press a play button and it says 4 hours remaining, and we say, well, I guess we'll figure out something else to do now while this consumes every drop of horsepower in my computer.
Right.
I think for me, it doesn't really get boring. It more like gets monotonous almost in a sense, because like when you're taking pictures, you're just taking pictures and then like moving the lazy Susan, taking pictures, moving the lazy Susan. But it's not so much that it gets boring. It's just monotonous, like I said.
Right. Yeah, and one thing that I always found weird is it's not always the same. Like it's not always like you're go, 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 go. And it's not always like, oh, you're just sitting at a desk. It's definitely like the highs and lows. Like I know that like right before we have an exhibit opening or we have like a new art show, it's definitely like, it's crunch time. We've got to get working. But like it's when we have those off, I don't want to say off seasons, but like those off times where there's a little less going on, at least when we're working in person. I guess like you said, it can kind of get monotonous and a little draining. So Chase, you've been working with Diego, our supervisor, with setting up the new exhibit coming up. How has that been?
Yeah, that started last week, and yeah, it's been a bit crunchy. We've been kind of racing to get everything put together in the span between the exhibition being completed, built on campus, to getting everything online for everybody to look at on our launch date. It has been a bit of a rush to put everything together, but it's looking really, really good. Um, I definitely love the exhibition itself and a lot of the works in it. I have a couple that are like, can I get this on my own wall? Um,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really cool.
Yeah, and I know that you and Diego kind of gave us like a sneak peek of the exhibit. I think it was last week. And it's super dope. For those in the audience who are kind of wondering about what this new exhibit is, um, it's this it's like this print shop, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chase.
Yeah, so it's about the Paulson Fontaine print shop in, I want to say, San Francisco. Um, and sorry, the print shop works with individual artists from all across the country to produce these prints and these artworks that involve both printing and whatever the artist does with their own work by itself.
Mhm.
Um, so the exhibition is called Personal to Political: The Art of 14 African American Artists Working with Paulson Fontaine. And it's fantastic. I just can't
Right.
talk up enough about it.
So we do have a new question in. Sorry, real quick. We do have a question in. So Chase, you'll probably be the one to answer this. What's the timeline of how exhibits are put together, and what is it like from beginning to end?
I'm not too active on like the high-end business and curational aspects of it, but from what I understand, this is something we've been planning out long term in advance. They kind of pre-order and pre-set up these deals long in advance. So when it was time to put together the exhibition itself, do the building in the museum to set everything up for the artwork and install the artwork itself, that only started a couple of months ago, I think. Ran a couple of months. It was havoc and construction in the museum, ladders everywhere, paint cans everywhere, um, until eventually it was complete. And basically, from the moment of it being put together and complete, and they have nice photographs of everything to show it was put together. Then our work started of actually doing the front end curatorial stuff, presenting it not to the walking in public in this case, but to the virtual public. Um, so in the first couple days after we got started on it, we were going up and down the museum with both traditional cameras and 360-degree cameras, taking beautiful, beautiful photos of absolutely everything. And once those first few days of getting the content together were done, then we spend, now we're working on building it all together, putting these panoramas together, these 360-degree photos, into a cohesive tour where you can jump from one to the next to the next. Putting high resolution photos of these artworks on the walls in these photos, so you can see much more closely and zoom in, and getting together educational material on all of these, recording audio tour information, doing little videos on everything, putting together like labels and UI elements and text describing them. And eventually, we're going to release these to the public, and you'll be able to peruse it whenever you want, just to walk on in virtually.
Awesome. So I know that Chase, you've been doing a lot of work, with this new exhibit. Erica, have you been working on the new exhibit as well, or have you been doing more of like work with the Egyptian collection?
Yeah, I think the most I've done with the new exhibit is sit through the walkthrough that Diego and Chase gave us, as well as looked at it on my breaks at the museum. It's still really interesting, and like I wish that the museum was open so that we could all just go in and like sit and look, because there's just these beautiful pieces that you just keep looking at. You keep seeing new things. But I am usually in the back with the Egyptian objects. So
Awesome. So I think that just about wraps us up for today. So thank you, Chase and Erica, for joining me. And if you guys did enjoy this conversation, please tune in to future podcasts because you'll be seeing Chase and Erica again in the future. If you want to see upcoming events, Miranda did just drop in a link in the chat so you can RSVP to future events that we have, whether it be the podcast or any other events. We do have our next podcast coming up on February 18th. I believe Chase is going to be joining me. No, Diego is going to be joining me for that one. We're going to have Andrew Thompson on. He is a photography instructor here at CSUSB, and we're going to be talking about photography, what it's like, how has it changed the art world, and just kind of, how it's viewed in the art world today. So thank you everyone for joining me. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.
And thank everyone for having me.
yes, thank you all.